I was the ultimate trust fund kid who only got into this elite university because my father donated a massive library to the campus. Yet the entire student body saw me as some predator toying with the campus queen. Even that viral photo of me pinning her against a tree in the campus grove was labeled as a humiliating moment of capitalist oppression, and her own roommates had the nerve to whisper that she was nothing but a gold digger. What none of them realized was that the girl, closing her eyes in tears against that bark, offering no resistance, was only doing it to save her dying mother and buy back the house her deadbeat father had gambled away. She had gritted her teeth and told me she would give me anything I wanted just to survive. Every public appearance where we held hands, every day she spent in my penthouse as my live and help, and every time I dressed her and made uniforms or designer gowns was leading to something real. When I finally took her to meet my family and planned our future by the shores of Lake Tahoe, it was because of a single night holding her close when I finally admitted the truth. I wasn't a villain. I was just a lonely kid raised on a mountain of cash who was terrified of losing the only family he had left. "Could you lend me some money?" That was the very first time Isabella Thompson had ever actually spoken to me since freshman year. She hesitated for a beat before adding, "I will do anything you want." I was completely floored. This girl was the undisputed queen of campus, a total ice queen who usually wouldn't even give anyone the time of day. So why was she suddenly approaching me? And why was she asking for cash? Everyone at the university knew exactly who I was, a textbook example of a spoiled rich kid. I didn't get into this prestigious school because of my SAT scores. I got in because my father, Mr. Miller, wrote a check for a new science wing. My college experience was purely about indulgence. While everyone else was buried in textbooks, my only job was to party and mess around. When I was bored, I would just hang out and watch the girls walk by, shamelessly admiring their legs. It was the kind of peak youth that felt almost too good to be true. Isabella was in my major and was the undisputed goddess of the department, but she never fit in with the party scene. She always carried herself with a cold distance, like a remote mountain peak standing tall and frozen above the rest of us. Plenty of guys with massive egos had tried to win her over, but they all crashed and burned. I had thought about making a move myself, but her stay-away vibe was so strong that I decided it wasn't worth the rejection. Today, however, the untouchable Ice Queen finally thawed. She led me to a secluded grove of trees behind the main lecture hall and quietly asked for a loan, keeping her eyes glued to the ground as if she couldn't bear to look at me. Seeing her standing there with her head down, I felt a surge of surprise, but I kept my face masked with a smug, careless grin. I asked her how much she needed and why on earth she was asking for $1 million. "My father gambled away our house and lost everything," she said, her voice shaking uncontrollably. "My mother is incredibly sick and needs surgery plus months of treatment, and I have absolutely no one else to turn to. $1 million was pocket change to me, but I wondered why I should bother helping her." Looking at how fragile and broken she seemed, I felt a strange, complicated knot of emotions tightening in my chest. Maybe I was just looking for a thrill, or maybe I wanted to see if I could finally break through that icy exterior of hers. I gave her a cold smile and told her that $1 million was a lot of money. I asked her why I should trust her to pay me back, or more importantly, what she even had to offer in exchange. Her entire body shivered as she shot me a quick, desperate look before biting her lip and looking away again. "If you help me, I will give you anything you want," she whispered. She took a shaky breath and added that she would even give me herself. My grin widened at her words. "You said it, not me," I replied, telling her not to worry because this would be over quickly. Before she could react, I lunged forward and pinned her against the rough bark of a nearby tree. She let out a small gasp of terror as I reached for her clothes, making my movements intentionally rough. For a split second, her instincts kicked in and she fought back, her body tensing up as she shoved against my chest with both hands. The resistance died out almost instantly. She slowly closed her eyes, her long lashes fluttering as 2 heavy tears rolled down her cheeks. Her eyes were bloodshot, and her entire face was masked in a look of total, heartbreaking resignation. Seeing her like that made my twisted sense of fun vanish instantly, like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over me. I let go of her and stepped back, telling her I was just messing with her. I promised to wire the money to her account later that day. "Just remember that you owe me now," I said over my shoulder as I turned to leave. I had only taken a few steps when I heard her whisper a soft thank you behind me. I woke up the next morning to my phone vibrating off the nightstand. My screen was flooded with notifications, over 99 unread messages, and every group chat was blowing up with people tagging me. I logged on to the main campus forum and saw a massive zoomed-in photo taking up the entire front page. It was the exact moment from yesterday in the Grove, showing me pinning Isabella against that tree. The angle was incredibly deceptive, making it look like we were pressed tightly against each other. My head was angled just right, and with her face tilted up, it looked exactly like we were in the middle of a heated makeout session. The background was blurred out to make us stand out, turning the photo into ironclad evidence that left everything to the imagination. The comment section was absolutely losing its mind. People were posting things like, "Holy crap, the Ice Queen finally got caught, and this is why I hate rich guys." Others were mocking her, saying they thought she was so pure, but she eventually sold out to the highest bidder. Someone commented that they heard Isabella was the one who went looking for the rich kid, suggesting she threw herself at me. They were saying she acted like she was better than everyone else, but she was just another girl after a paycheck. The screen was drowning in toxic insults and malicious rumors calling Isabella a materialistic fake. They were tearing her apart for pretending to be innocent while supposedly selling herself, and the comments just kept coming. Right then, a new notification popped up on my phone. It was an iMessage from Isabella asking what she should do, followed by a tiny, heartbroken emoji. I rubbed my aching temples and typed back a quick reply telling her not to panic and that I was on my way. We met up at a tiny, secluded cafe on the edge of campus. She was wearing a face mask, but I could see her eyes were red and swollen from hours of crying. She looked down the moment she saw me. "People are staring and whispering about me everywhere I go," she said, her voice breaking. "Even my roommates are making snide comments about me being a gold digger." She looked up at me with eyes full of panic and shame, asking how she was supposed to show her face on campus anymore. My head throbbed as I cursed myself for being such an idiot yesterday. My little stunt had created a massive mess for her. Seeing her so broken made me feel a wave of genuine guilt. I took a breath and told her that if everyone wanted to call her a gold digger, we might as well give them exactly what they expected. I told her those people were probably just jealous anyway. She looked at me with total confusion. "I have an idea," I said, leaning in and lowering my voice. "We're going to pretend that we are actually dating." I explained that it was perfectly normal for a couple to get a little physical in a private spot. If we were officially together, the rumors about her selling herself would just disappear. She tensed up immediately, her eyes flashing with hesitation. "Don't say no just yet," I urged her. I told her she should stop living in the dorms and move into my off-campus penthouse instead. I told her I actually needed a housekeeper and that she could clean and cook for me to pay off her debt. I offered to credit her $10,000 a month against what she owed me. This way, her housing was taken care of and our relationship would look legitimate to the public. It was the perfect way to silence the haters and solve her problems at the same time. She sat in silence for a long time, staring at her lap while she processed everything. Finally, she gave a tiny nod and whispered her agreement. We had a lecture that afternoon, so I timed my arrival perfectly. With everyone watching, I walked straight up to Isabella at the entrance of the hall and naturally took her hand in mine. Her hand was freezing and shaking, but she didn't pull away. Ignoring the shocked and judgmental stares from the crowd, I led her right into the lecture hall. The room went dead silent the second we walked through the door. Every face was a mix of shock, mockery, and curiosity, and every single eye in the room was locked onto us. I scanned the room and gave a cold, warning glare to a few guys who were whispering. Then I calmly led Isabella to a couple of seats in the back row. I didn't let go of her hand once. Honestly, even though her skin was cold, Her hand was so soft and delicate that it felt surprisingly good to hold. The drama started to die down after that. Since we were officially a couple in the eyes of the public, the nasty rumors about her selling herself behind closed doors didn't really have any legs to stand on anymore. If we were openly holding hands and go to class together, then that little moment in the Grove was just a couple being private, not some scandalous headline. I also managed to track down the person who took the photo. It was some guy named Tyler from another department who had been obsessed with Isabella for a long time. She had rejected him countless times, so he was bitter. I had a few friends go have a serious talk with him, and it wasn't long before he posted a full apology on the forum, admitting the photo was just a misleading angle before deleting the whole thread. As we agreed, Isabella moved into my penthouse to start her new job as my housekeeper. The place was huge, and since I usually live there alone, it always felt a bit too quiet and empty. Having her around definitely made the place feel more like a home. She hadn't even been there for 48 hours before my mischievous side started acting up again. I went ahead and ordered a classic French-made outfit online, complete with the lace trim and the little headband. When I handed it to her, her face turned bright red, and she looked like she wanted to run out the door. "What is this supposed to be?" she asked, holding the thin fabric with trembling fingers. "It is your new uniform," I said with a straight face. I told her it was perfectly normal for a housekeeper to wear a maid outfit. I told her it was just a way to indulge a small, harmless hobby of mine, making sure to emphasize that it was all in good fun. "Absolutely not," she snapped, shoving the outfit back into my hands and turning to walk away. I knew she would react like that, so I spent the next few days on a relentless mission to convince her. I wasn't forcing her, I was just being persistent. While she was cooking or cleaning, I would casually mention how a t-shirt and jeans just didn't fit the vibe of such a high-end apartment. I told her to think of it as role play to make life more interesting. I reminded her that it was just the two of us and no one else would ever see her, so there was no reason to be embarrassed. I kept telling her how amazing she would look in it. I just kept at it until her firm rejections turned into silence, and eventually I could see her resolve starting to weaken. Finally, one Saturday morning, I walked out into the living room and saw her in the kitchen making breakfast with her back to me. She was actually wearing the maid outfit. The black and white dress fit her perfectly, showing off her slim waist, and she had even tied the ribbon on the back into a neat bow. Her legs looked incredible under the short hemline. The morning sun was hitting her just right, and the whole scene was surprisingly beautiful. She looked a little awkward and shy, but somehow she looked like she belonged there. She stiffened the moment she heard me coming, refusing to turn around, but I could see the tips of her ears turning bright red. I just smiled and sat down at the table without saying a word. It looked like she had finally given in to my request. To make her feel a bit better about the whole thing and to make the uniform worth her while, I decided to change our deal a little. I told her that I would start giving her $20,000 a month to cover groceries and utilities. Whatever was left over would be her salary, plus a special bonus just for wearing the uniform. She stopped chopping for a second and let out a surprised little sound. That small victory definitely made me feel more adventurous. If she was willing to wear the maid outfit, I started wondering what else I could get her to try. I started ordering all kinds of outfits for her. I got her a cute sailor schoolgirl uniform that looked incredibly youthful and a much bolder bunny girl set with leather and fishnets. I even found some vintage-style Lolita dresses with intricate lace that made her look surprisingly elegant. Every time I gave her something new, I could see her struggle with embarrassment. When she saw the sailor uniform, she just grumbled about it being way too childish. The bunny girl outfit made her turn beet red, and she threw it back at me, swearing that she would never wear something so ridiculous. I was getting pretty good at this by then, and I knew that persistence was key. I stopped trying to talk her into it and tried a different approach. Sometimes I would just leave the box outside her bedroom door, or I would just give her a hopeful look when she was working. We would have these little standoffs for a few days where she would hide the clothes in the back of her closet. But eventually, when I least expected it, I would walk in and find her wearing the new outfit. I would find her in the study wearing the sailor uniform, standing on her tiptoes to reach the top of the bookshelves. One Sunday, she actually showed up in the bunny girl outfit she had promised to never wear. She brought me a plate of fruit, her face and neck completely flushed, and she couldn't even bring herself to look me in the eye. I have to admit, having a girl that beautiful walking around my place in those outfits was an incredible perk. It was definitely the best view I had ever had in that apartment. We became practically inseparable on campus. We went to every lecture together and grabbed lunch at the dining hall every day. Whenever I was playing basketball, she would be right there on the sidelines with a bottle of water and a towel waiting for me. The awkwardness we felt at the start began to melt away as the weeks passed by. She stopped tensing up every time I reached for her hand. Sometimes when I was acting like a loudmouth or joking around with my friends, she would just stand there with a small smile that seemed both annoyed and fond of me. She was still quiet in public and kept her mysterious vibe, but we developed a real rhythm between us. At home, she took care of the penthouse while wearing those ridiculous outfits I bought her. In public, she played the role of the perfect campus queen girlfriend that everyone envied. My nights of partying until dawn and hitting the clubs started to disappear once Isabella Thompson moved in. That massive, empty apartment finally started to feel like a real home, and it had this magnetic pull on me that I could not quite explain. I found myself wanting to just hang out on the couch every evening. I loved watching her move around the place in her uniforms or just lounging together while some mindless show played on the TV. It gave me a sense of peace I had never known before, but old habits die hard. One of my old friends came back from London and insisted on a big reunion at a bar downtown. The party got wild fast, and I completely lost track of how much I was drinking. By the end of the night, I was an absolute mess. I have no idea how I even made it out of the club. My only memory is collapsing on the sidewalk and trying to befriend a stray dog while rambling about life. In my drunken stupor, I managed to call someone and mumble into the phone that I was lost and needed a ride home. I felt someone hauling me up off the concrete as I started to drift back to reality. A familiar, clean scent filled the air and cut through the stench of cheap tequila. I forced my eyes open and saw Isabella looking down at me. She was as gorgeous as ever, but she looked absolutely furious. She struggled to keep my dead weight upright while scolding me for getting so wasted. I just gave her a goofy grin and did not say a word as she shoved me into the back of an Uber. When the car pulled away, I let the momentum carry me until my head was resting right in her lap. I expected her to shove me off, but she did not. She tensed up for a second before shifting around to make me more comfortable while whispering that I should not drink so much because it was bad for my health. I looked up at her with blurry, bloodshot eyes. I reached out to pinch her cheek, and her skin felt so soft and warm against my fingers. I teased her by asking if my rumored girlfriend was actually worried about me. She tried to turn away, but stopped herself, instead just swatting my hand aside and telling me that nobody cared about me. She complained that I smelled like a brewery and was making her sick. Our driver just laughed and said that young people should enjoy themselves while they still have the energy. He started telling some story about dating his wife, but I tuned him out. Isabella felt so warm and soft, and she had this scent that made me feel completely safe. I smiled and snuggled closer to her before mumbling something incoherent and passing out completely. I woke up the next afternoon with a headache that felt like a power drill was going through my skull. The bright sunlight was blinding as I sat up and realized that I was not in my own bedroom. My heart skipped a beat as I frantically looked at the other side of the bed. The bed was empty, but there was a clear indent on the pillow next to mine. Right then, the door creaked open and Isabella walked in carrying a glass of honey water. She looked a little awkward when she realized I was finally awake. She told me to drink some water as she handed me the glass. I asked her why I had ended up in her bed. She shot me a look while her ears turned a light shade of pink. She told me I had a lot of nerve even asking that question. She explained that I had passed out on the way home, and she could not wake me up once we arrived. She tried to leave me on the couch, but I apparently threw a fit and refused to let go of her. I had insisted on sleeping in her room because I was scared, clinging to her like a little kid. I tried to remember anything, but my mind was just a blur of static. I asked her what happened next, and she just shrugged and said we went to sleep. She told me I held her all night and did not move an inch until the sun came up. She walked out and left me sitting there with my head spinning. I leaned back and groaned to myself about what a wasted opportunity that was. I had the campus goddess in my bed all night, and I spent the whole time actually sleeping. Alcohol was definitely a curse. The real trouble started when my father, Mr. Miller, called me. He told me he was coming to San Francisco for business next week and wanted to drop by to see how I was doing. I felt a wave of pure panic wash over me. I tried to talk him out of it by telling him I was doing fine and he should just focus on work. He just laughed and asked why he could not visit his own son. He mentioned he had heard I was actually behaving myself for once and staying out of trouble. I told him that was because I finally had a serious girlfriend. I lied and said we were living together, hoping that would make him think it was too awkward to visit. I thought that would scare him off, but his voice exploded with excitement. He was thrilled that I was finally doing something responsible with my life. He told me that now he absolutely had to come and meet her. He joked that he had to see which poor girl was crazy enough to date me. He told me he would see us next Wednesday and hung up before I could say another word. I stared at my phone in despair as the line went dead. I had completely trapped myself in my own lie. I knew there was no stopping my father once he made up his mind, so I had to go talk to Isabella. I approached her nervously and told her I needed a huge favor. She was busy arranging flowers, but looked up when I started speaking. I explained that my dad was visiting and that I had accidentally told him we were living together. Her eyes went wide with shock, so I quickly added that he was so happy about the news that he insisted on meeting her. I asked her if she could just pretend to be my real girlfriend for one day while he was in town. Her face turned bright red, and she gripped the flower she was arranging so hard I thought she might snap the stems. She looked down and stayed silent for what felt like an eternity. I was already panicking and trying to come up with a backup plan for when she said no. Just as I was about to give up, she gave a tiny nod and whispered her agreement. I let out a massive sigh of relief as the weight lifted off my shoulders. Then I realized I had a new problem because I could not exactly have her meet my father while wearing a maid outfit or a schoolgirl uniform. Since this was the first time she was meeting my family, we needed to keep things classy. I asked her if she was free this weekend so I could take her shopping. I told her we needed to find her something formal and elegant for the meeting with my dad. She looked like she wanted to say no, but she stopped herself. She looked down at her casual clothes and then thought about how intense my father could be during an inspection. She finally gave me a small nod. I was so hyped on Saturday morning that I was up before the sun. I went to her room and knocked, telling her it was time to get moving. I heard some rustling inside before she groggily told me the door was unlocked and I could come in. I walked into her room where the curtains were still closed and the light was dim. Isabella was sitting up in bed, clutching the blankets with her hair all messy and her eyes half closed. She looked like a sleepy kitten. I walked over and grabbed her wrist to pull her out of bed, joking that she was burning daylight. She was still half asleep as I pulled her upright. The strap of her silk nightgown slipped right off her shoulder and the neckline dipped low. I caught a glimpse of her pale skin and her collarbone in the dim light before she let out a scream. She was wide awake now, and her face turned as red as a beet as she scrambled to cover herself with the blankets. I froze for a second because the sight of her was absolutely stunning. I tried to act like a gentleman and quickly turned around while apologizing profusely. I told her I was just trying to wake her up and did not mean for that to happen, even though I was secretly thrilled. She wrapped herself in the blankets and glared at me with a mix of embarrassment and anger, telling me to get out so she could get dressed. I laughed and backed out of the room, telling her I would be waiting in the hall and to hurry up. I teased her about meeting the in-laws and told her we were going to make her look perfect. I barely got the door closed before a pillow slammed into it. She yelled back that she was not anyone's daughter-in-law and that I was being ridiculous. I stood in the hallway with a huge grin on my face. Isabella finally came out after a while, and she looked incredible. She had put on some light makeup that made her features pop, and her hair was perfectly smooth. Even in a simple sundress, she looked like $1,000,000. She asked me what I was staring at and looked away shyly. I told her I was just admiring how beautiful my girlfriend looked. I gave her a huge grin and took her hand, telling her we were going to turn her into the most beautiful girl my father had ever seen. I grabbed my keys and led her to the garage. I had one mission today, and that was to find her the perfect outfit for the big meeting. I quickly realized how naive I had been about the whole shopping trip. I thought we would just pick something out and be done in 10 minutes. Isabella had a completely different plan in mind. She hit every single boutique in the mall, starting from the ground floor. She spent hours holding up dresses and disappearing into fitting rooms. By lunchtime, my legs were killing me, and I was carrying a mountain of shopping bags. She tried on everything from professional suits to casual outfits, and she looked amazing in all of them. Still, nothing felt quite right. I needed something that would truly blow my father away because he was a tough man to impress. I was about to give up when it finally hit me. We needed a dress. Nothing shows off a woman's elegance better than a perfect dress. I grabbed her hand as she left the last store and headed straight for the most expensive boutique in the city. The boutique was quiet and so high in that you felt like you had to whisper. I immediately spotted a pale pink silk dress in the window. It was simple and elegant with a cut that was absolutely flawless. I told Isabella she had to try it on. She took one look at the price tag and gasped, whispering that it was way too expensive and unnecessary. I told her to just trust me and shove the dress into her hands. I did not give her a chance to argue as I pushed her toward the fitting room. I waited outside, feeling strangely nervous. I was completely speechless when she finally stepped out. The pink silk made her skin look like porcelain, and the dress hugged her curves in all the right places. She looked absolutely breathtaking with the hem falling perfectly at her knees. She stood there looking shy with her head down and her hands clasped in front of her. Under the store lights, she looked like a delicate flower in full bloom. She was so elegant and pure that it actually took my breath away. I told her that was definitely the one. I heard my voice was a little shaky and my heart was pounding. She started to protest about the price again, but I just waved her off and told the clerk we were taking it. I did not want to give her a single second to change her mind. Even though she looked a little nervous in the dress, I could see the spark of excitement in her eyes. I knew right then that every penny was worth it. We got back to the penthouse with a ton of bags, and I collapsed onto the sofa. I looked over at Isabella and saw her cheeks were flushed and her hair was a little messy from our long day. A mischievous idea popped into my head. I leaned in closer and told her there was one more thing we needed to talk about. I moved closer to her and tried to look as serious as possible. She looked at me with a confused expression. I pointed out that since we were supposed to be living together, my dad would get suspicious if he saw us sleeping in separate bedrooms. I tried to look as innocent as possible to make my logic sound convincing. I suggested that we should probably start sharing a room now just to get used to the role. Her face turned bright red again, and she could not even look me in the eye as she asked what I meant. I cleared my throat and told her that one of us needed to move into the other person's room. I said we had to sleep in the same bed. She immediately shouted that there was no way that was happening. She rejected the idea instantly, while her ears turned bright red. I asked her why it was such a big deal and started using every ounce of my charm to convince her. I told her it was not like we had to do anything and that we were just going to sleep. I pointed out that the bed was huge and there was plenty of room for both of us. I promised to be a perfect gentleman and said it was all for the sake of the plan. I asked her what would happen if my dad wanted a tour of the apartment. I spent 30 minutes giving her every reason I could think of until she finally stopped shaking her head. Eventually, she whispered that we could give it a try. I was absolutely thrilled. I knew that being prepared always paid off. The thought of sharing a room with her and seeing her face every morning made me feel like I was on top of the world. I had been too drunk to remember anything the last time, but I was completely sober now. I knew I had to make the most of this chance. When night finally came, the only light in the room was the soft glow of the bedside lamp. Isabella finished her nighttime routine and slowly climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. She was as stiff as a board and stayed as far on her side of the bed as possible to keep her distance from me. She looked like she was bracing for a battle, which I found both hilarious and adorable. I moved a little closer and asked her how her mother was doing to help her relax. She seemed surprised by the question, but told me that her mother was doing much better. She said the surgery was a success, and she was on the road to recovery. I told her I was really glad to hear that. She thanked me again for the money, but I told her it was no big deal and to stop worrying about it. We talked about school for a while until the tension finally started to fade. I could smell the faint scent of her soap, and it was incredible. I could not help but tell her how good she smelled. She just whispered that most girls smell like that. I kept the conversation light while my eyes drifted down to her hand resting on top of the blankets. Her hand was so small and delicate with pale skin. I reached out as casually as I could and placed my hand over hers. I told her how tiny her hands were, and when she tried to pull away, I just held on and compared our palm sizes. I slowly began to lace my fingers through hers until our hands were locked together. She looked a little panicked for a second, but she did not pull away or try to fight me. She just let me hold her hand in the dark. My heart started racing when I realized she was actually letting me hold her. I turned on my side to face her and looked into her eyes. I asked her in a whisper if she thought I was a bad person. I asked her if she hated me for making her wear those outfits and forcing her to pretend to be my girlfriend. She shook her head and looked at me with total sincerity. She told me I was not a bad person, just a little lonely. That word hit me like a physical blow. I had never really thought of myself as lonely before. I had all the money in the world and a huge circle of friends, but her words made me realize how empty my life actually was. I wondered if I really was lonely beneath all the flash and money. She started to look away shyly, but I reached out and gently tilted her chin back up. I did not want her to look away from me. We just stared at each other in the silence of the night. I could hear her breathing and see the light reflecting in her eyes as her lashes fluttered. The air between us felt heavy with intimacy, and the room seemed to be getting warmer by the second. My heart was pounding as I felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to kiss her. I leaned in slowly and pressed my lips against hers. She was so soft and cool, and she tasted incredibly sweet. Her eyes went wide with shock at first, but I did not pull away. I kissed her more deeply, gently tracing her lips with my tongue. She was as still as a statue for a moment, not knowing how to react. I felt her body finally start to relax against mine. She closed her eyes and began to kiss me back with a shy, clumsy hesitation. It was the most incredible feeling, and I felt a wave of affection for her wash over me. I deepened the kiss and felt her open up to me. I kept our fingers locked together while my other arm wrapped around her waist to pull her closer. I wanted her as close to me as possible. I ran my hand over her back as we lost ourselves in the kiss. We finally pulled apart when we both needed to breathe, and she looked absolutely stunning with her flushed face and dazed eyes. She was breathing hard and leaning against me for support. She looked like a beautiful flower after a rainstorm. I felt a surge of desire and was about to take things further, but she suddenly grabbed my wrist. Her voice was shaking as she begged me to wait a second. She asked me for a little more time because she was not ready yet. I saw the fear and shyness in her eyes and took a deep breath to calm myself down. I was not going to push her into anything. I pulled her back into my arms and rested my chin on her shoulder, telling her that I would wait as long as she needed. After a long silence, I started telling her things about my past that I had never told anyone else. I told her that my family had not always been rich. My father was always chasing success, and my mother was right there by his side through everything. She was the kindest person I had ever known, and she was my whole world. Things were finally starting to look up for my dad when he got a contract for a construction site. My mom was driving me there to see him when we got into a horrific car accident. She threw herself over me at the last second, and I did not have a scratch on me, but she did not make it. I could not even finish the story as I buried my face in her neck. I told her that in all these years, she was the only person who had ever seen how lonely I really was. She did not try to give me any empty words of comfort. She just turned around and stroked my face before gently patting my back like she was soothing a child. She told me to just close my eyes and go to sleep. I snuggled into her and found a comfortable spot before closing my eyes. The next few days were the most peaceful and warm days of my entire life. Isabella finally got used to sharing a bed with me, and she was not stiff anymore. Every night, I would pull her close and let her rest her head on my arm while I held her. She was shy at first, but eventually she started snuggling up to me on her own. She would find the perfect spot and curl up against my chest like a little kitten. Then the day of my father's visit finally arrived. We both got dressed up and headed to the airport to pick up my father. I made sure she wore that pink silk dress we bought, and she put on some light makeup. She looked absolutely stunning in that dress, and she stood out in the crowded terminal. The moment my father walked out, he ignored me completely and focused all his attention on Isabella with a huge smile. He walked over and gave me a heavy pat on the shoulder while laughing loudly. He told me I had great taste and that I had finally done something right for once in my life. He turned to Isabella with a much softer smile and asked if she was the famous Isabella he had heard about. He told her she was even more beautiful in person than she was in the photos I sent. He told her that if I ever gave her any trouble, she should call him immediately so he could set me straight. Isabella blushed but stayed perfectly poised as she greeted him. She told him it was nice to meet him and said that I had been treating her very well. My father laughed and promised her that he would be the first one to deal with me if I ever stepped out of line. My father was beaming as he pulled a small velvet box out of his bag and handed it to her. He told her it was just a small gift for their first meeting and hoped she liked it. Isabella looked at me for approval, and I gave her a small nod. She opened the box to find a stunning diamond necklace that sparkled under the airport lights. She tried to tell him it was too expensive to accept, but he would not hear it. He insisted that she take the gift. He told her it was just a small token of his appreciation for her putting up with a troublemaker like me. He pressed the box in her hands and made it clear that he was not taking no for an answer. We went to a high-end steakhouse for dinner, and my father spent the whole time talking to Isabella. He asked her all about her studies and her family, and they got along famously. He looked at her with so much pride and affection that it was obvious he already considered her part of the family. After dinner, I dropped him off at his hotel. Before he went inside, he pulled me aside and told me that he could tell Isabella was a special girl. He said she was grounded and sincere, unlike all the other girls who were only interested in our bank account. He told me I had better treat her right and stop acting like a kid because he did not want me to lose her. I nodded and promised him that I understood. The night air was cool and refreshing as Isabella and I walked home hand in hand. The streetlights cast long shadows of us on the sidewalk as we strolled through the city. She leaned against me with a peaceful smile on her face. As we passed a quiet little park, the moonlight hit her face just right, and I felt my heart skip a beat. I led her to a park bench and sat her down. She asked me what was going on, but I did not say a word. I just took her face in my hands and kissed her with everything I had under the moonlight. This kiss was not like the shy ones we had before. It was full of passion and certainty. She was surprised for a second before she closed her eyes and kissed me back with just as much intensity. She wrapped her arms around my neck, and we stayed there with our foreheads pressed together after the kiss ended. I looked her in the eyes and asked her to be my real girlfriend. She looked at me with a beautiful smile and leaned into my chest. She called me an idiot and asked if I had not realized she was already my girlfriend. I was so happy I felt like I was going to explode. I let out a shout of joy and picked her up, spinning her around in circles. She laughed and held on to me as tight as she could. She told me to put her down because people were staring, but she was smiling the whole time. That was the day we truly fell in love with each other. Everything in our lives felt perfect after that. Every morning started with a kiss from her that tasted like mint toothpaste. I always tried to sleep in, so she would come and wake me up, but I usually just pulled her back into bed so we could cuddle for a few more minutes. We still sat in the back of the lecture hall, but we were not pretending anymore. I would hold her hand under the desk and whisper things in her ear just to watch her blush. She would always end up poking me with her pen to get me to stop. She would focus on the professor while I spent the whole time sketching her profile on my notebook. Whenever she caught me, she would try to look annoyed, but she could never hide her smile. We spent our nights watching movies on the couch while she leaned against my chest. She always got teary-eyed during the sad parts, and I would tease her about being a crybaby while pulling her even closer. I still talked her into wearing those uniforms every now and then. She was still shy about it, but she did not seem to mind as much anymore. Sometimes she would even ask me which one I wanted her to wear that day. Shopping was not a chore anymore because I loved seeing her happy. I would wait patiently while she tried things on and gave her my honest opinion. If I saw her eyeing something she liked, I would go back and buy it later just to surprise her. When the semester ended, I went with Isabella to visit her mother. She looked much better than I expected, and she had a huge smile on her face the moment we walked into the room. I did not even wait for Isabella to introduce me before I walked up and called her mom. She looked completely shocked by the name, but she seemed happy about it. I spent the afternoon talking with her and making sure she was comfortable. I even arranged for her to be moved to a high-end private care facility where she would get the best treatment possible. Isabella was teary-eyed the whole time we were moving her mother into the new facility. As we walked out into the sunset, she leaned in and whispered to me. She thanked me for everything I had done for her family. I stopped and gave her a playful flick on the forehead, telling her she was being silly for thanking me. I told her that her mother was my mother now, and that taking care of her was my responsibility. She rubbed her forehead and looked at me with tears in her eyes before giving me a huge smile and a nod. I eventually took her on that trip to Lake Tahoe I had promised. Life there felt like a dream. We spent our days walking through the charming mountain towns and watching local artists work in their studios. She found a pair of simple silver earrings, and I insisted on buying them for her as a token of my love. We rented a tandem bike and rode along the shore of the lake with her in the front seat. Her long hair caught the wind and brushed against my face, smelling like sunshine and wildflowers. We laughed the whole way as we pedaled along the scenic lakefront road. We stayed in a beautiful cabin with a perfect view of the snow-capped mountains. We woke up to the sound of birds every morning and spent our nights on the balcony, wrapped in each other's arms while looking at the stars. We would talk for hours about our childhoods and our plans for the future. Other times we would just sit in comfortable silence and enjoy being together. I took her to all the best local spots to try the food. She wanted to try a little bit of everything, and whenever she found something she loved, her eyes would light up with pure joy. It was on one of those starry nights in Tahoe that she finally gave herself to me completely. It was a moment that was far more tender and beautiful than I ever could have imagined. There was no rush or pressure, just pure love and affection between us. As she opened up to me with so much trust, I felt a profound sense of gratitude and a deep responsibility to protect her forever. I was as gentle as possible with her, feeling her initial nerves meld away into pure connection. We spent the rest of the night locked in each other's arms, as if we were two parts of the same soul. The sound of the wind off the lake was the only music we needed. On our last day, I took her up to the mountain peak. We stood there looking down at the crystal clear water of the lake while the sun glinted off the snowy peaks in the distance. I wrapped my arms around her from behind and rested my chin on her head. I called her name and told her to look at the incredible beauty of the mountains and the lake. I told her that just like the snow and the moon, we would always be there to reflect and support each other. She turned around to look at me with tears of joy in her eyes and gave me a firm nod. She stood on her tiptoes and kissed me with everything she had. The cold mountain air swirled around us, but all I could feel was the warmth of the most precious person in my life. We held each other tight as the rest of the world faded away. My life as a spoiled, rich kid and all those years of loneliness were finally gone, replaced by the pure love she gave me. I knew right then that I had finally found where I belonged. I had found a happiness that no amount of money could ever buy. Standing there on that mountain, we were the luckiest two people on earth. The world saw our relationship as a transaction, but for us, it was a mutual surrender. I used money to hide my loneliness while she used her cold exterior to survive a harsh world. True wealth is not about having a massive bank account. It is about finding someone who sees through your mask and loves you anyway. You should never judge a life you have not lived because everyone is fighting a battle you know nothing about. I hope you find that one person who makes you feel safe enough to drop your guard so you never have to be a lonely child again.